Hello, Mage fans. This is Mage the podcast that works hard towards Ascension so you don't have to. I'm your host, Adam Simpson. I'm joined by co-host Terry Robinson. And while the two of us were preparing for this episode, I was confronted with the information that Terry is actually working for the CIA. Now, I confronted him about this, and he told me that I'm working for the CIA, which was news to me, I gotta say. So we went to a trusted third party to resolve this and found out he's working for MI6. So Terry and I are going to watch each other very carefully. As long as there's no sudden moves, we should get through this episode just fine. Coincidentally, we're talking about the New World Order today on Tomes of Magic. Before we get into it, though, Terry, are there any announcements?
I guess the only announcement I have in that regard is when preparing for this episode, every time I opened up a program and it said, like, processing, I got a little bit gun-shy. So I think I have read this book with the appropriate degree of critical eye. But that's all for me.
Yeah, well, just to add to sort of a mini announcement, when Terry and I did the episode for the first New World Order convention book, and that was back in first edition, actually, there were a lot of quotes from this 60s British television show called The Prisoner. You know, to try and get ready for the episode, I wanted to watch it, and I could not buy it on DVD. It just was not available anywhere that I was able to look. When we were getting ready for this episode, I went online, looked again. Amazon had it on Blu-ray quite affordably. So I got my set, and I'm very happy that I did. Maybe we can... well, I don't think we need to give you an Amazon link. It's pretty easy to find. But it's called The Prisoner. It's a 1960s British television show. It's all about psychology, trickery, spy stuff, and all that goes with it. Very appropriate for a New World Order story that you may be planning. So, to talk about this book, the actual title is Convention Book New World Order. Terry and I refer to it as New World Order Revised because it is a part of Revised Edition, the third edition of Mage. This thing clocks in at 100 pages, just like all the tradition and convention books of Revised Edition. There were 5 authors. This came out in 2012. Now, that is 8 years after the book titled Ascension, which claimed to be the last word on Mage, and it was for 8 years. And after that, in 2012 and 2013, we get the final 4 convention books that we were not able to get during the rest of Revised Edition's run. So these books exist in sort of their own unique neighborhood of the Mage the Ascension setting, in that it states in the introduction for this book, and also the Progenitors book that I've been looking at, that this occurs 12 years after the Avatar Storm started, and everyone accepts the Avatar Storm as permanent. Of course, the technocrats call it the dimensional anomaly, but you get the point. And so this is, of course, a very different look at the Avatar Storm from what we get in the book titled Ascension, which spoke about how this was meant to tick down to an exciting conclusion. So, Terry, are you ready for a walkthrough? Because I sure am.
I am glad to. And one of the things I think that is interesting as Adam talks about some of the basic information about this, while these books were being published, Werewolf the Apocalypse 20th Anniversary Edition was in Kickstarter or had just been. So we were still getting Mage revised books well into the X20 lines coming into existence. This is during the brief period of time where Mage books were being written by CCP, which covers these 4 books plus the Mage 20 books up to, I believe, Book of Secrets, where it was officially owned by Paradox Interactive. So this is a pretty fascinating slice in time. If all works out well, we are going to have an author interview with the developer, Ryan Macklin, and hopefully get his commentary on what it was like to develop this.
Hey, Terry, there's one gap in my knowledge, and there may be a few listeners who have the same gap in their knowledge. I did notice in the first few pages this mention of CCP, which, looks to my eyes like some sort of company name. But I look on the back of the book, and it says Onyx Path. So I was thinking, hey, this is the first Onyx Path book. But what is the relationship between Onyx Path and CCP?
So what had happened, and this is something that Rich Thomas has discussed a number of cases. So in 2006... CCP and White Wolf Publishing merged. They were purchased. The White Wolf Atlanta offices became the offices for CCP North America, with White Wolf president Mike Tinney becoming president of CCP North America. Now, CCP Games owned and developed EVE Online, and their goal was to create a World of Darkness MMO, which ultimately proved to be a fraught project, which was under development from 2006 to about 2014. It was canceled ultimately, and the property was sold to Paradox Interactive. So when we look at this, White Wolf Publishing was owned by CCP. CCP themselves did not publish books in-house. They did not have their own writers. So they contracted out to Onyx Path Publishing, which was started by Rich Thomas, to do the book. So Onyx Path was asked to come up with the art assets and the text and everything. It was ultimately approved by CCP. So CCP contracted with Onyx Path Publishing to have these books produced. And that is kind of an overview of the relationship. CCP had ultimate approval, and you would pitch a book to CCP and they would say, yeah, we want this, or no, we don't want this, or we have these ideas. But ultimately, almost all of the writing was done by Onyx Path people, which is why in like the special thanks section, you see a lot of Onyx Path names, the first two being Rich Thomas, followed by notable industry professional Eddie Webb, as well as art director Mike Chaney, being some of the names that are still associated with Onyx Path to this day. So Onyx Path does not own any of the licensing to White Wolf, but White Wolf will contract with them to have books produced, and they receive pitches from Onyx Path to say, hey, we think this book would resonate with the market and do reasonably well. The question of what CCP and Paradox are getting from it is they wanted a big, rich world that they could develop other properties on top of, and weren't too interested in the RPG tabletop version of things, so they would just contract that out to other people.
Thanks. That gets me up to speed. Hopefully that was good for the listeners, too, who might be wondering about that. Well, I've slowed you down enough. Let's hear that walkthrough.
Sure. The book opens with a tortured hermetic. I am always uncomfortable about these sections, so I'm going to move on quickly. Did you have any thoughts about the prelude?
Nope, move ahead.
Okay. The introduction is entitled In Victory, and it talks about how the N.W.O. has had immense success and technology has allowed it to see for the first time in history the very face and notion of the consensus. But it also mentions that there is an anti-technological elite that must be stopped, that there are strains among humanity that oppose technology and its advancement, and that some of its hypertech is no longer working. The theme of the book is the human spirit. The group is highly idealistic, and they fight to remove dangerous ideas by shepherding the Union along a path towards victory, and by extension, humanity. A recurring theme here is that the N.W.O. considers itself to be guiding the technocracy. The idea of the human spirit is very vaguely defined, and it kind of shifts notions as we go through. It also talks about how the N.W.O. is willing to make the hard choices to keep the Union going forward, to protect humanity, and to guide consensus. And that makes them look like the bad guys, and it very explicitly says they know this. That is a switch from previous editions where either they were conspiratorial and they may have considered themselves to be the evil power brokers that were controlling everything, or idealistic, where they're like, no, we're not doing anything evil. These were just the necessary choices that they had to make. This is a very self-aware New World Order. The mood presented is a house dividing. They are still reeling from the dimensional anomaly, and the Union is reassessing what it is doing. In the wake of the financial crisis, the Syndicate had the opportunity to wreak havoc and had done so. The Void Engineers are acting like cowboys. The Iterators are out of control. And then it says, but the Progenitors are doing fine, which is very worrying. And that's the Progenitors I love to see. And it says that the technocracy is having difficulty holding together in the face of the modern age. It also has a note that says, a different time, that the Avatar Storm has happened and is still affecting Horizon Realms. In Mage 20, we get the idea that you can run it so that the Avatar Storm happened and then went away. Here, it is very much treating the dimensional anomaly as still being in place. Merzaba, the comet that visited in 2012, came and went. All the events of the book Judgment are not considered to be canon. It even says this book, for the most part, leaves off from where the Iteration X book was in 2001. So much of the intervening events before that, it's just kind of ignoring. So it's like Psychopops, meh! What did you think about the introduction?
No, you bring up a lot of good points, but what I noticed so much when I was reading through this was there was one point saying, isn't it great that we can upgrade this book for the years that have gone by since, revised edition books were being published? It's like they're performing this important duty for me. And I was reading through the book. It's like, I don't think RPGs need to be upgraded every 10 or even, 15 years. I think if a role-playing game and its setting are appealing, then any updates that might be necessary can be done by the fans at home. I realize I may be in the minority on this. It just kind of seemed odd to me. It's like, aren't you thankful that we're updating this for you? It's like, I think I got that covered, but all right.
Chapter 1 is entitled History 2.0, and it talks about how the dimensional anomaly hit in 99, and by 2005, the last transmission from Autochthonia had been received. There was a schism within the convention as to whether to move ahead without control or to wait for it to return. The interim cabal of the Collegia and White Suits held it together, but they were not quite fast enough. That during the time when Control was not in charge and the White Suits and the Collegia had not established control, that various groups had done experiments in the public and they may be running around in the public. One of the things to me as a consumer of RPG books is this book is very much presented as for players. The reason it mentions a lot of divisions, schisms, and problems is because it wants there to be plot to explore and avenues for characters to take. So in a lot of cases, it is presenting more cleavages and breaks within the organization, so there are opportunities for games for your characters to take place. As an antagonist group, you don't need so many of those. But if you're playing it, you need a lot more of that information to know what's going on inside. So when I talk through things, that is kind of the frame that I am coming from. They talk about how 9/11 was entirely mortal, but they only came to that conclusion after doing a very thorough search to see if there were any supernatural powers that were involved in it. They talk about the Greylocke Incident, where Greylocke Chantry in the Pacific Northwest was raided as the technocracy believed it had accumulated enough paradox, what they refer to as statistical inevitability, to blow. And by it, I mean Greylocke Chantry. Iteration X engaged with a master, there was a paradox backlash, and all of the people that were wired into that operation remotely were killed. Iteration X and N.W.O came to blows, but barely held it together. We have a new group called the Feed, which monitors social media, which is very hard. And the Feed is kind of interesting in that it gives more context to what we got in Iteration X, where we suddenly had the macro technicians, which was this group very much unlike what the rest of the methodologies were, and the Feed kind of fulfills that. So I look forward to, as we go through Revised, is each convention going to get that update that is a different group that kind of shines a light on what is happening? And to me, one of the most important lines that occurs in this is that there is a 12x increase in extraordinary citizens. Some say that it is due to the rise in technology, the fact that mortals have access to so much information. Others say that it's due to the dimensional anomaly. Whatever it is, Fallen Tower Las Vegas suggested to us that the number of sorcerers versus mages is at least 3-1 and probably closer to 5-1. Here, there's been a 12x increase, which if there are now 60 times as many sorcerers as there are mages, that super changes fundamentally with the technocracy and what the traditions are up to. Revised lowered the barrier between static practitioners and true magic practitioners. And one of the recurring themes in this book is the technocracy is just the enlightened aspect of the technocracy it's just the tip of a very large unenlightened iceberg. Much of the history comes in the form of a paper that is submitted to the N.W.O for review by the Collegia, and it is littered with commentary talking about the various mental procedures that are being done by the author of the paper to try and subtly influence the people reading it. It starts with a statement that the goal of the N.W.O is to safeguard the collective will. It is the only supernatural belief that they have, that the collective will of humanity is a thing. It can cause things to manifest, and guiding and controlling that is very important. Everything the N.W.O does is laced with mind procedures. Calls very strong attention to that in a sidebar entitled A House of Mind. We get the 3 theories. This is something that we originally got in Guide to the Technocracy, and here it presents it again. We have the elitist view advocated by Professor Tanaka that claims that only a few people per century change human history, and they are likely enlightened. Everyone else is lesser. We get the empowerment theory from Terrence White. The technocracy adapts to each age to further the world, and the most recent version was set down in the Victorian age. Humanity as a sum total is capable of doing great things. It is merely led and guided by the technocracy. And then finally, we get the conspiratorial view by Donald Richardson that the N.W.O's roots are ancient and there has always been a conspiracy to control history. The N.W.O. is merely the current title holder. And what this section does is reframes much of the convention's history. It says, the Siege of Mistridge was the start of a recurring pattern of cyclic motivations. Reality deviants would provide an affront to collective will or endanger the masses. We would intercede, hostilities would be exchanged, and things would quiet down. New innovations in philosophy and technology would be found, life would march on, and deviants would once again messily prove why we can't have nice things. It notes that there are early documents that exist about what happened during the Siege of Mistridge, that it wasn't a cakewalk, that it fell to internal treachery, and it very much seeds the idea that the history of the tradition is not established. There are a lot of missing documents. It's presented as a plot device. Going forward a few centuries, it also talks about the idea that often field agents romanticize their mission, that the modern black suit calls back to the black uniforms that Basil Rathbone's Skeleton Keys had, that draw back to the black-clad armor that the N.W.O. precursor knight, the Order of Reason, the Gabrielites, wore, because the dark metal or whatever was laced with a primitive version of premium, and there is this almost Arthurian strain of romantic power that goes back through. And they're like, well, as long as it helps the agents do a good job, we're fine with it, but don't let it get out of control. The pivotal moment they talk about is Queen Victoria's second reorganization. So this gets a little fuzzy because we get a definitive Victorian age history in Victorian age for M20, but as of here, starting in 1961, it says the Union was kind of asleep at the wheel, while Prince Albert started a reorganization, and it was ultimately finished in the grand housekeeping by Queen Victoria. That in 1886, the Union came to know of a group headed by Crispin and Rathbone, who were investigators in the United Kingdom. They joined the Union in 1897. They're not quite sure what they were a part of, and then the great house cleaning occurred that created the technocracy we know today. We get some notables about key figures. Reginald Proctor, the leader of the Proctor houses, that was a great character in the formation of the technocracy. He takes his own life in 1914. Zarg Vargo threatens the world in, I think, 1918, and it was a note that the N.W.O. needed to do a better job of responding to threats. This was also the high point of the Syndicate and the N.W.O. getting along. One of the recurring themes also presented in the book is kind of a war between the individualist Syndicate and the collectivist N.W.O. We get a history that goes through the Second World War. It mentions the character Henri de Loris, who was a former ecstatic who converts to being part of the N.W.O., and they hold up as an example of why it's good not to shoot every reality deviant, because they can prove to be quite useful, who eventually becomes kind of the human face of the N.W.O. During the Cold War, the N.W.O. had hide void engineer failures to keep out aliens. I thought that was kind of fun. And then in 1996, there is violence with the Syndicate, where 3 Syndicate members who failed to approve N.W.O. funding requests were quite simply executed. Another character, Yukio Ishida, disappears at Mecca. She was an agitator that was pushing for the N.W.O. to recognize how white and male the technocracy was, both currently and throughout its history, and to reform that. There is now a Collegia of Gender Studies. After the Dimensional Storm, the N.W.O.'s goals are kind of closer to the frontline views, that it is less removed from the operations of the agents it has on the field, and that there may be a new grand house cleaning that occurs again. There is a fight within the Union. The Iterators and Void Engineers want to recover contact with their distant constructs, and that people died at a pretty high rate between 2000 and 2005 during attempted recovery missions, most of which failed. Slowly, calmer heads prevailed, but periodically things would slip through and constructs would fall back to Earth. And this raises an interesting question that says, if you have an orbital construct that falls out of the Umbra, where is it falling out of? And it suggests here it is quite literally something that comes out of the sky. It also mentions that the Nefandi are getting more active again. Throughout most of Revised, we are given the idea that with the severance of the Nefandi to their Star Squid lords, they have calmed down. Now that is back. This book is taking place in 2012. It mentions that the last timetable was set in 2000, and it failed to set up the technocracy for success in the 21st century. There's another one that is occurring in 2015 that everyone is kind of preparing for. The idea here that they try and present is that by having a unified history, they can allow the past to drive the future, and that there is a war within the organization to determine what that is. throughout this section, it kind of sets up the conflicts that the rest of the book will follow, such as the Syndicate versus the N.W.O, the Frontlines versus Controls, Rescue versus Ignore Horizon, the idea of unity of belief versus truth and such. We then get information about how the N.W.O relates to other groups, that they are showing that it is harder to control reality as any slips in showing hypertech can be seen by millions of people in minutes. This book being written in 2012 was very much in a world where Twitter and Facebook were up and running and not quite as ubiquitous as they were today, but certainly on the way. It talks about how the organization is mostly sympathizers, unenlightened people that do a lot of the work, and it says don't piss them off and don't waste their time. Extraordinary citizens are those that have maybe the dimmest precursors of enlightenment. They are able to interact with the hypertech of the organization without too much difficulty. It talks about how the iterators were hit hard by the loss of autochthonia, and they are fascinated by the combination of the new methodology, the feed, as well as global psychology and integration of computation and mind in a way that hadn't been done previously. They say they are worried about the macro technicians, who are new and weird. That is the group that is worried about mass problems in production design and implementation. And it made an interesting reference when it says, we may have an Electrodyne engineer issue on their hand. And just the idea of there being a group of technocrats that are from Iteration X that are ready to defect, that's a game I'd be fascinated to see. They have better integration with the Progenitors, who tend to get along at street level, but they tend to fight at the higher ups. They provide kind of a counterbalance to Iteration X as preventing one group from being the sole provider of muscle within the group. The N.W.O also provides Progenitors with field testing of a lot of their things. The Syndicate, they mentioned, has weathered the loss of their leadership very well. Of the conventions, the Syndicate was likely the one that had the fewest people beyond the gauntlet when the dimensional anomaly occurred. They are viewed as loose cannons and failures, and they mention that Special Projects Division is still around. The Void Engineers, they indicate, require the most direction from the N.W.O, that there are some Void Engineers that are taking off-world trips, and they purportedly say they've been able to navigate it with advanced hyperspace technologies and so on. It then goes on to discuss kind of the traditions. It says that the traditions kind of are so internally opposed that having a pogrom to wipe them out isn't necessary. It also mentions that the traditions are kind of a breeding ground for marauders. So one idea that is sometimes ventured out is we need the traditions because if we stamp them out completely, we're just going to have more of the mad running around. It views the flaws of each tradition kind of as a way for the N.W.O to gain leverage. It also mentions, my favorite aside was that the Euthanatoi are the deadliest and require special security details. And it mentions, though, that their best recruiting tends to be from among the Order of Hermes, whose very top-heavy power structure creates disaffected apprentices that are relatively easy for pickings. They fear the Nefandi, and as their new chief target, their methods of indoctrination are very similar to technocratic processing. The Marauders, as I said, they view as out-of-control traditionalists, and their tactic of dealing with it in modernity is to inform others and let them deal with it. It talks about how the Camarilla vampires tend to be fine because of the masquerade, the Sabbat not so much, and we get a mention to hunters! So you can tell that this is a revised book. And that was a very long discussion of me talking about the history. Adam, what did you think about Chapter 1?
I thought it was very clever. On page 24, it mentions the New World Order is eager to hide their origin in the Cabal of Pure Thought. There's a mention that they might have some connection to this Cabal of Pure Thought back in the Renaissance era and in Middle Ages, and they say, of course, that's ridiculous. No one would give that any credence. And as a person who's been following the older mage books, I liked that mention. Very, very clever. Page 29, it's interesting to note the dissolving construct field agents. The black suits that if you kill them, they dissolve into a puddle, disappear completely. They are not a thing of the past. That was very much black suits of first edition, and then second edition said, no, they're mages, they're real people. If you shoot them, you have a dead body on your hands. And so now it says, hey, the dissolvers, they're back. This is a part of what we're doing now. So I thought that was kind of fun. I like that from first edition. Page 33, the technocracy's timetable has a different meaning now. This just jumped off the page to me. I could not help but notice it strongly. In the past editions, the first two editions of Mage, and really I think the past of Revised Edition too, the technocracy's timetable was a master schedule for releasing scientific knowledge and technology to sleeper society. And it was just that. And of course, through that, you have tremendous influence over all number of things, and that was not lost on the technocracy. But now the term is different. Now the technocracy's timetable is goals for directing sleeper society. It's not specifically scientific knowledge and technological breakthroughs. So that was interesting. There is a rumor going through this book, through this chapter, I should say, that in 2015, 3 years in the future, there may be a purge of the technocracy, a big shakedown. So 15 years after losing contact with leadership, it seemed like a bit long for me, but still, this idea that the technocracy, I should say, might fragment in the New World Order, since they consider themselves the leaders of the technocracy, they're very concerned with that. That would mean the loss of a lot of control, and that's what they're all about. Commentary in this chapter. Basically, Terry said the format of the chapters is there's one New World Order Ivory Tower member who's presenting this great big paper that we read through bit by bit, and there are these little bitty sections kind of inserted in, almost like sticky notes on top of the page with a different typeface, and these are notes from a higher-up who has reviewed this paper and has thoughts about it. And so through these little almost sidebar comments, we get a little bit of that secretive, sinister feel of the New World Order, because without it, just reading the paper straight, you get this very, plain Jane, hey, we're ordinary, normal sorts of people. Why would you think that we have anything to do with conspiracy? So I liked that touch. It's like, no, there is a little bit of the sinister and the secretive going on here for the storytellers who want to bring that in. And as Terry said, the Nefandi are back. It is multiple times in this chapter and later in the book. It says, hey, the Nefandi are active. They are dangerous. We are very serious about watching out for them. They are bad news. And I thought that was cool. I like them as a villain in Mage. And I think, as Brocado said in one of the Mage 20 books, the Nefandi were largely overlooked for Revised Edition. It's almost as if they faded away. And so I think it's fun to bring them back. Page 39, it mentions that the New World Order created this new methodology called the Feed to make up for the Syndicate's methodology, media control's poor performance. So I thought that was kind of fun, kind of a dig there, and yet another reference to the ongoing rivalry between the Syndicate and the New World Order, which was always one of the most one of the most interesting things about the technocracy. Finally, we finish out this chapter with the outside relations section, and from reading many past Mage books, I've gotten kind of used to sliding past this section because they are so often poorly done, but this was dynamite. This was really, really good. The New World Order sample character is talking about what they think of the other four conventions in the technocracy, and there's all these plot hooks, there's all these, I thought, insightful ways of looking at these other conventions and giving ideas to a storyteller, like how you can use them, what's going on with them nowadays. And then we get to the traditions, and I was expecting a lot of, oh, they're stupid, we hate them, which I'm so used to seeing in some of the past Mage books. But no, this was really good. There were some plot hooks mixed in, and it took the format, instead of what do we think about these rogue traditions, it's how do we handle them? When we get our hands on them, what is the best way to take advantage of that situation? And so I thought that was a very plausible and useful way to look at them. It was very clever. Hats off to that.
Chapter 2 is entitled Division of Labor. Overall, it says that each methodology kind of does a different thing. And even within that, though, the three kind of echelons of membership within it, the N.W.O. are the unenlightened, the sympathizers, the extraordinary citizens, and then finally that is capped off by the enlightened. And an interesting thing it mentioned here is it talks about how an extraordinary citizen may be who leads a strike force. It may be, for a low-level threat, the thing the characters, if this is an antagonist group, may be going up against. And it is interesting to me that in this organization, that is the level of power that is brought to bear, that you may have 3 or 4 clones and a single extraordinary citizen, and that may be what your first group of Black Hat and Mirror Shades are. It talks about how the value of the organization is devotion, respect, and vision. And this is one of the cases where it mentions this is a 24/7 job. Technocrats don't spend much time not being technocrats. And it also points out that devotion and respect kind of conflict with vision. And they say that's the point. If you can't balance these 3 factors, you won't be able to survive. They recruit from academia. They have constant tendrils into colleges, universities, and other areas of higher learning. They look for recruits through police and intelligence communities. They look through the Fourth Estate, aka the press. They are perfectly fine to poach employees from between methodologies as well as from outside their convention, and defectors. They have a high rate of failure, and they never process people with high levels of mind, but they can prove to be exceptionally valuable resource, and they are almost always monitored. It talks about how there is a implicit hierarchy of it going the ivory tower at the top, everything else, and then the Q division. And then it gets into the methodologies themselves. Adam, would you tell us about the methodologies?
Well, certainly. First off, we have the Ivory Tower, which started in the late 1800s with Reginald Proctor, a senior member of the High Guild, which later became the Syndicate. Proctor saw a one-world government as a solution to global instability. The Ivory Tower got its name from the White Tower of Languedoc that you can read about on page 29 of Castles and Covenants for Sorcerer's Crusade. Today, the Ivory Tower leads the New World Order and, by extension, the entire Technocratic Union. This methodology has around 30 collegia, the most famous being the Collegium of History. These are organized much like departments at universities. The Ivory Tower also had separate divisions called the Bureaucracy and Record Keeping, but in 2003 they combined to form Administration. After Iteration X, Administration runs the largest and most advanced computer network in the world. Next up, we have Operatives. They formed quietly at the same time as the Ivory Tower, but became visible when they stepped up to the challenge of taking out Tsar Vargo, Zeppelin Emperor, in the early 20th century. That incident established the operatives' preference for subtle mind techniques over brute force. The operatives are enforcers and field agents. They deal with threats, help the public forget strange events, and infiltrate the Union's enemies. They are best known for their Men in Black, which started in the 1950s, although that name is changed to black suits in this book, when clones were created and dressed in black suits to calm the public after numerous marauder incidents. Today, intelligence analysts gather and process huge amounts of data to advise not only the operatives, but every convention of the technocracy. Field agents start out as black suits who perform a wide variety of duties. More than 50% of black suits are clones. Gray suits perform infiltration and espionage and often work alone. White suits are leaders of the operatives. The operatives recently created the Enlightened Shock Corps, the New World Order's own cyborg force, kind of an answer to the hit marks. Watchers were created in the Victorian era from researchers who used to belong to the Cabal of Pure Thought. Their mission is to observe the masses of society and watch over traditional media such as television, news, and newspapers. Field observers are embedded in amalgams of agents all through the technocracy. They report their observations to the white suits. Field operators watch the masses. They observe reports of reality deviance as well as coordinate the efforts of large numbers of sympathizers working in the media, law enforcement, and operating security systems. Lensmen coordinate the efforts of the other watchers as well as making sure no one is spying on the New World Order. Watchers don't just observe. They put their own messages into the media and use a variety of skills to maintain observation of difficult targets in the field. As we heard, the Feed, the new group, started in recent years as a reaction to the internet and the public's rapid adoption of it. They split off from the Watchers when they realized traditional media and new media are fundamentally different. They observe and get involved in online activity that seems noteworthy. One of their mandates is to find if new forms of media are causing the increase in numbers of extraordinary citizens. Another mandate is to recruit those extraordinary citizens. The trend analysts lead the Feed. They analyze data on the internet and its trends while trying to find new ways of modeling the data to learn the internet's secrets. Deep divers are field agents who observe what the masses are doing with social media. They look for new trends in society that could have greater meaning. They also look for new technologies that are resulting from online activity. The handlers focus on finding and then observing extraordinary citizens with an eye towards recruiting them for the technocracy. Q division is a kind of quasi-methodology, although not a formal methodology. It isn't connected to any of the others and sort of operates on its own. The engineers of Q Division create equipment for the New World Order. The difficulty of using hypertech after the dimensional anomaly, and be careful not to say Avatar Storm, has had a negative impact on this group. They used to work in Horizon constructs. They lost many members to the Avatar Storm and had to relocate to Earth. I make the administration its own methodology and emphasize its policymaking and leadership. My ivory tower is just the collegia which advise administration. I think the academic structure of the collegia make it good at research and experimentation, but poor at administering the convention. Iteration X revised, phased out hit marks, but after that, Panopticon started using them, and now the New World Order is making their own. Clearly, I am not the only person who thinks hit marks are cool. I feel vindicated. This book implies the internet was a surprise to the technocracy. I would say it was a planned part of their timetable. However, having the New World Order panic over it is plausible. I would imagine the New World Order had ideas of how it would cement their control of the masses, but instead it made personal conversations into public phenomena. Also, because of its networked structure, the internet is real hard to control. Anything that's hard to control makes the New World Order nervous. However, I've got to say, The Feed does not sound like a good name to me. I think I would rename them. But that's my thoughts on Chapter 2. Terry, your thoughts?
I thought this was pretty interesting. I like the fact that they stated that the Ivory Tower is kind of primus inter partes, is kind of in charge. And the fascinating thing to me was that it mentioned that they were so many different schools and that they range from 3 to dozens. This gives us an idea that the Ivory Tower has probably something like 90 agents in it, depending on how you want to do sizing, something between 90 and 300. And those kind of concrete numbers suggest to me like what the entirety of the N.W.O. and the technocracy by extension look like, and details like that are very clarifying to me when they make sense. I was blown away by the fact that the black suits are something like 70% clones. I think it mentioned 50 to 60% of any group, and then more so in others. We also get our first named white suit, James Michael Smith. Previously to this, in all other books, the white suits are merely alluded to. They are too close to control in general to have a formal backing. I liked the Watcher's messy history coming out of the tower, and I didn't realize that there was a callback in Sorcerer's Crusade. We get information about that structure. So in somewhere between 4 weeks and 3 years, when you and I discuss that, I look forward to getting that. I agree the feed is kind of weird and messy. I do like the fact that it does have that cross purpose where you're like, hey, Syndicate Media Control, you didn't do this well enough, which sets up a really nice turf battle that you can have if you kind of want it in your game. I, like Adam, I don't think the internet was unexpected. I think it's just one of those things where they didn't anticipate how quickly it grew. And I would be fascinated to see information about how the technocracy finds extraordinary citizens. One of the things that Mage does not excel at is it is not very good for a clue-based investigative game compared to other games like, say, Gumshoe that have very strong clue-based stuff, and just a lot of the sections talking about piecing together information and stuff. I feel like as a storyteller, I would have difficulty piecing that together. I also would have liked a little more information about Q Division. They said that it's kind of shrunk. I always thought that was kind of fun to have there. I wish we had gotten a little bit more, but certainly I'll take it. Chapter 3 is entitled Assets. The first part is Movers and Shakers, and we get more information on the character of Henri de Loris, who is a member of the Operatives and has been active from 1732 to the present. I know we don't necessarily want a mage game like Vampire where everything is dominated by multi-century-old characters that have been doing subtle agenda for millennia or what have you. I do like having some old farts kicking around that are still active. I think it is fun when you have one or two Hermetic Masters that are kicking around that are like, yeah, I remember the signing of the Declaration of Independence. I just think it makes the world very rich, and Mage is a game that's pretty good at making new characters matter in a way that a lot of other games didn't. We get more information on how this character eliminated a perversely brilliant Nephandic cell along with the N.W.O. before kind of switching sides. And it made mention that, like, it's important to have dependable emotional support. I'm like, that's a good thing to normalize within Mage. I can get behind that. And that while Henri has become the face of the N.W.O., it is super weird to me to have a face of the N.W.O. when we frequently think of them as being faceless. But politics has kind of stepped in and prevented him from truly leading the convention at the new symposia just because he is a convert and people don't trust him. And the next character we get is Paige Telford, who is a character that came up with a faster way to reintegrate agents but is making people soft. A lot of the references to processing and so on really make me wish that Mage had like a stress system of some sort so that we could mechanically represent what agents go through. The closest we get is kind of quiet, which we never really get details on, and I guess you could use willpower to address it. But to me, it would be really fascinating to have kind of a stress system And you could say the superpower of the N.W.O. is that they're able to handle that super well. They don't have the weaponry of the Iterators. They don't have the ability to physically heal like the Progenitors, but they do have the ability to debrief and help agents cope with seeing the unknowable in a way that no other group does, and that is their superpower. Again, I'm doing that thing where I take the fact that I stay up with games and see what newer games are doing it and go, why didn't this thing happen 9 years ago? We also get John Smoke, the citizen journalist who spent time in Afghanistan. And then we get a very meaty Legends section. And it's called Legends. They didn't even bother charting it up to be like rumors within the Ivory Tower or something like that. The first is the Scroll of Thothmes, which is a mystical artifact from 1500 BCE that is heavily encoded so that only the enlightened seemingly can read it. Crispin in the 19th century had evidence that it exists. Fragments have been found, but it has not been confirmed yet, and there is a drive to find it, as it may kind of suggest a ancient Egyptian origin to at least the work the N.W.O. is doing. And if there's anything any mage group wants more so than to win the Ascension War, it's to prove that they're older than someone else. So being able to go back then would be great, because especially there are other parts of the book where they're like, oh yeah, we're super new. We're younger than the Electrodyne engineers. We then get information on secret agent John Courage. My favorite line here is they're like, oh yeah, he's defected 8 times since 1972. The other interesting little fact that they include is that there don't appear to be any John Courage imitators out there. So if you're dealing with John Courage, it's probably the actual John Courage. Another one is we get information on Saint Damien, who was the person behind the Precepts of Damien, which it lists as having taken 5 years and is the first person to get a blood-free agreement from all conventions. And that the idea that the Precepts of Damien are the corner of a web of union-wide mind effects that keep the organization together. This is something that is alluded to in the book Ascension, where they talk about losing access to control possibly broke a network of effects that caused social conditioning to allow control to still work. This is also something where I would really like a mechanical system to represent it. The characters that are gung-ho for the Union do get bonuses, but have difficulty breaking ranks, where others who may be more free-thinking are not as controlled, but they suffer for it. They experience doubt, and that can cause problems. I am personally a fan of the fan theory that Saint Damien is Lucifer from Demon the Fallen, that it's just this character we have no information on that comes out of nowhere that is able to organize a whole bunch of mortals to do something before the end times arrive and then disappears again. But I super like the information here. And it also posits that Saint Damien's, one of their greatest effects was to remove their own record from existence. They wanted to be a near mythical figure that no one could find their mortal foibles, or maybe they just had dirty laundry, or who knows, maybe file storage was just bad back then. And then it also mentions Room 101, which is something that gets pride of place in a lot of references to the technocracy, but it mentions that before the dimensional anomaly, Room 101 flowed with the perfection of finely honed procedures. Minute details could be changed by the staff to assist agents in whatever way was needed to get the results they desired. There was a sense of boring routine. Work inside could take hours, but felt like an indeterminate amount of time had passed. That this has now changed. So it talks about how the fact that everyone has vague memories of there being Room 101, but no one's quite sure what it is. This makes it somewhat terrifying and somewhat fascinating. This could be in the same way that you could argue the control that comes out of the emergent belief of the technocracy. Maybe Room 101 is an emanation of the collective desire of the N.W.O, or it could be something more sinister. We just don't know. It then goes over a number of fronts. It talks about organizations like private security firm Cobalt Security, which is run by process sympathizers. Tech startup Chatter, which is Twitter or an analog, is used to control digital expression as well as to try and curb the virtual adept threats. It also talks about, it uses the line, and it uses this construct in a couple of places where it says, their digital web. And I'm not quite sure what they wanted to mean by that, as opposed to the digital web. There's a ham-handed reference to Fox News in the form of Continental News Corp. They talk about wetwork cells, which are groups of between 3 and 6 that deal with other mages. You can't contact them, and they are just called in to deal with things. We also get a college, Prescott College in New England, where 60% of the staff is processed, which I thought was a fascinating idea, until we find later that processing is a Mind 5 Prime 2 rote. How the heck are they doing it on that scale? And that's kind of a case where the systematic wheels fell off for me. It gives advice on how to run an N.W.O game, and it talks about the importance of giving everyone motives, that the N.W.O. thinks that they are the good guys and that everyone should have an area of expertise. We get the group, the Ministry of Information, which does investigation and lead following. It is a media task force, not a strike force. They work subtly. They may gather dirt on a chantry or other group and simply reveal it to the public in ways that are injurious and damaging to them. It is a great way to have an indirect foe for a game. We get the characters of the Control and the Minister, and I got the suggestion that these were titles that were supposed to mean more, but ultimately didn't wind up doing so. And we get, in the form of Aisha Jones, a pretty potent heavy hitter, a character with Enlightenment 7, which we just don't have many high arete characters comparatively in Revised. It is now a multi-methodology group that can aid or interfere. Then we get to a fascinating, albeit confusing section called Correspondence as Data, and it posits the existence of the data sphere. Previously, the only alternative sphere we had kind of gotten was dimensional science as a substitute for spirit, and there it was pretty well the same. It just posited a slightly different gauntlet chart, where if you were in a high-tech stronghold, the gauntlet was much lower, and if you were to try and cross the dimensional anomaly further out, then there would be greater difficulty. Here, instead of having correspondence, you have the data sphere. It is unique in that it requires successes to make a connection to another target, and that the difficulty of doing so drops as your sphere level increases, which is a mechanic we hadn't previously seen in Mage. For instance, a starting character trying to connect with another entity would need the subject's presence or a body sample or their source code or a social security number or something like that. You need 8 successes on an Wits plus Enigma roll, and that you can only roll for it every 4 hours. Where at higher levels, if you have data mastery of 5, you have 5 dots of data, you only need 2 successes. You can roll once a turn, and you only need the briefest amount of information for the person. I found this section interesting, but somewhat difficult to follow. It also mentions that dimensional science is common among the technocracy, but data is rare, and it was originally a virtual adept thing. We then get a section called Gear for the Job. We get an update on what the group's stuff is. There's a whole bunch of standard stuff. I was kind of disappointed that they reintroduced Maynard, because I think it kind of breaks the game in a lot of ways to be like, yep, that guy's a vampire. I got my vampire glasses on. You're like, okay, I got it. But it did introduce a few things that I thought were really neat. One was the Gun for the Job, which is a gun that will only ever hit the intended target, which allows you to spray indiscriminately into a crowd and only hit your target. The Chirp node is a device that allows you to diminish someone else's backgrounds. You can interfere with another character's influence rating, for instance, or fame. There's an aside that mentions Be Seeing You, which is a reference, as Adam mentioned earlier, to the show The Prisoner. And to the best of my knowledge, this is the first time we get Be Seeing You as in-game text. It was originally introduced in Guide to Technocracy, so it's good to see it again. We also get the Communication Jammer, which is Enlightenment 2, so it's some real weak sauce. It also deals with the problem of the holdout chain gun, which is Enlightenment 4, 20 primal energy, 4 background points. It's just a gun. It shoots things. Why do I have to pay a whole bunch of points to upgrade it? It doesn't seem particularly special. It causes 6 levels of lethal damage, and it's fully automatic. This is really a part where I feel like the wheels started falling off the book a little bit. The editing started to lose me. There just wasn't enough information to use the systems as written in a lot of cases, but some of it was wildly creative and interesting. For instance, as we move into the rote section, it suggests that there's a app model where enlightened users can download a rote. Sure, we're never given systems really on how that works or if it is consumed, or it suggests that you can get a phone that has 1 point of quintessence in it that lets you do something, which doesn't actually seem better than a regular phone. Rote-wise, we get something called Jung's Trick, where with Mind 3 Data 2, we are able to kind of give someone a post-hypnotic suggestion, which makes them try and do a particular thing the next day. That's fine, except for earlier in the chapter, it specifically mentions that you can't use a sphere effect that is channeled via the data sphere unless the data sphere is at least that high. So if you want to do a Mind 3 effect using data paired with the data sphere, you need to have at least data 3. The personal assistant software is not just a personal assistant, it generates an entire kind of AI. It is using Mind 5. These are some very mind-heavy, dot-heavy things, and just I did not feel as if it held together in that regard. Finally, we get character sheets, and these are all fine character sheets. It does that thing where it's seemingly all just white people that are thin, and I always wish for a little bit more diversity in the art that's being presented. And then we get to the epilogue. So this was a big old chapter. What did you think of the systems, people, and stuff chapter, Adam?
In these final 4 convention books, the chapter 3 is like, I think it's fully half the book. It's like chapter 3s are just massive. There's a lot in there. Let's see, for the movers and shakers, these sort of sample characters in the New World Order, I thought there were some interesting characters there, and they give you people who are alive today that you can interact with. So I appreciated that. I think that's more useful for storytellers. There were 2 pages of legends, which normally would be right up my alley, and I like the fact that they did this. However, the actual legends that they're dropping here seemed, I don't know, kind of weak to me. It's like they were trying to put in plot hooks, and I'm glad they were doing that, but these plot hooks just didn't appeal to me very much. It seemed like watered down legends to me somehow, but perhaps that's just my point of view. It mentions fronts, the kinds of companies and organizations where the New World Order will try to set up and use that as a blind to hide their activities from sleepers. I like those, and after each one they give a specific example of one with a name and where it is and what specifically it is doing. I thought that was so useful. It was very thoughtful for storytellers. There was a section on running an all New World Order amalgam of player characters. I thought that was actually rather poor. It just didn't seem to have much meat for me. The sample amalgam didn't seem like a sample amalgam to me. It was just like 2 characters. It's like, this character leads the amalgam, and she has this boss that's kind of not in the amalgam. And I was like, well, this is not a sample amalgam. It's just like sample supervisors in the New World Order. The new data sphere, it was interesting. In the early Virtual Adept book, when they were talking about the 10th sphere of data, it seemed like a separate thing from the correspondence sphere. But here they have the new data sphere as an alternate for the correspondence sphere.
The Virtual Adepts have a 10th sphere of information.
Well, yes, but I don't know. I thought data and information were sort of the same thing, but I don't know. Maybe that was just something that I saw. But this new data sphere is supposed to be a more technocratic alternate for the correspondence sphere. I thought this section would have benefited from more explanation, more examples of focuses would have been great for me. My impression of it is, I think it's a clever idea, but I don't think I would use this in my games. And the reason is, in some situations, it seems way too powerful, and in other situations, it seems not nearly powerful enough. For example, if I was going to have some New World Order agent who knew the data sphere and then put all of the player characters into the digital web, I think the data sphere would just mop up the place. But if all the players have to go out into the woods and deal with, I don't know, renegade dream speakers or something, then the data sphere is not very useful at all. So I don't like that. It seems too specialized. You're only going to want to use it in certain, tech-rich situations, and then it's going to like steamroll correspondence sphere, if I'm understanding this correctly. So either I don't like the way this is conceived, or it's just an example of not enough explanation, not enough examples. I thought it was too ambitious an idea for too short a space in Chapter 3. From there, we get into gear. Gun for the job. As Terry mentioned, you can fire into a crowd and only hit your targets. That sounds cool, but it's too powerful an effect for the level of this particular device. I think they should have ratcheted that up a bit. They mention mirror shades, basically sunglasses like government agents are famous for wearing in so many movies and stories of the past. And they talk about the mind effects that you can do with this. And they get into some specific rules about this. And I actually rather like that, so I appreciated the mirror shades. When it came to the chirp node, which, of course, think of it as Twitter node, I would change this to creating or altering social media posts temporarily and having those temporary social media posts be non-traceable. That just seems to sit better for me as a way to use this one item of gear. They mentioned the Spectre Mark III. It's basically a good car, and you can customize it by adding these other things to it, and they give you a menu. There's no stats for the Spectre Mark III. I guess I can understand space limitations, but can't you at least say, hey, in this past book, there's a car, use those stats? I mean, basically the storyteller saying, throw me a bone here, and they didn't. So I was a bit disappointed there.
We got the rules for balloons 3 times.
You're just making it hurt worse, Gary. Yeah. They mentioned the chatter bomb. It's a way to make vulgar effects more coincidental. This one I like the idea, but this just did not work for me. When you're sitting at a sidewalk cafe and you look a block over and you see somebody do something amazing and impossible, you need something that is going to act on your frame of mind right then if you want to keep a vulgar effect from really being vulgar and sort of quickly convert it to being coincidental. Soon after they see something impressive, I guess a lot of people will pull out their smartphones and start interacting with it, but that's going to be to send messages and photos to other people, not to read what other people are saying. And, when I'm walking down the sidewalk and I see something happen, I don't expect people on Twitter to be talking about it. I got to be perfectly honest about that one. So, yeah, this chatter bomb gear, it's just stretching things too much for me. I'm going to need to workshop this before I can run with it. And there's another one called Dirty Bomb, which is an idea from old action movies. But basically, it's in the action movies, it's like jury rigging quickly a bomb to go off. It's messy, it's unprofessional, it's not as big a bang as you want, but it does the job, darn it. In this case, it is using primal energy to turn a human body into a kind of a mystical bomb that's going to go off and have terrible effects for people who grab one of your New World Order agents. So when the enemy gets a hold of one of your people or something like that. I thought this was really cool. Reading through that, it's like, I like this idea. I can see this working. This would be, whether I'm using the New World Order as villains or player characters, either way, I think this is a really cool thing to run with. We get into rotes. First, the 15 minutes of fame, I thought was very clever. I thought it was very topical. It's basically manipulating social media to make someone be a flash in the pan, give them their 15 minutes of fame. Everybody's looking at them, and then right after that, their life gets difficult and annoying because everybody's talking about them. There's going to be some people stalking them, trying to get more, juicy news or something as it happens. I thought this was clever and appropriate, so I liked this rote. There's a rote called Going Viral, and I thought it should have a lower sphere requirement, and I think the success of it should be based on the number of excesses of pulling off the rote. I think this one, it has too high requirement to do it, and then after you do it, it's always going to run the same way. So I did not appreciate the way they set up that rote. They mentioned something called the personal assistant software, where a mage can sort of make a whole copy of their mind and I guess you could say spirit, and then put it into a device, and so that device thinks like them and can do things for them in a way that's very handy. I thought that was clever. However, there is no mention of the fact that if that device gets captured by an enemy or just someone who isn't your friend, that is going to be a terrible liability. That is going to be all kinds of mystical connection to you for pulling rotes against you. So I think there should have been some kind of mention in there. There's rote for processing, which is basically totally rewriting someone's mind, and I think it should include the life sphere. When you're doing something that pervasive and invasive to someone, I think their nervous system and their body is part of the equation. So I think it's appropriate to include the life sphere there. Finally, we get to the templates, and yeah, we got this little problem with the templates. Terry and I mentioned this, and Terry's being nice, and I'm sorry, I'm just not feeling very nice right now. I'm just going to bring this out in the open. The scandal is, every one of these template New World Order characters has sphere ratings over 1, but they all have an enlightenment, which is arete, of only 1. So it's like, that's a good trick. How did you learn all those spheres with 1 enlightenment? And it's for every single one of the templates. It's like, yeah, editor should have caught that, or the developer. So those are my thoughts on Chapter 3. Sorry to take so long, but there's just a lot of pages to this.
Because in mine, it doesn't do that. Oh, that's fascinating.
Are you looking at PDF?
Yeah. Are you looking at the printout?
Yep.
Let me grab my print copy.
And I've had
We're
this
doing
for
it
years.
live.
I've had this for years. Terry's pulling something off of his shelf to tell me if I am crazy. With all the mind rotes in this book, I just might be.
I don't think you are crazy. Put it this way, Adam. We've worked together enough. You're not crazy because of that. I'll put it that way. Oh man, no, you're right. My printout copy is the same way, but the PDF copy is correct.
Well, they fixed it in the end.
The other thing that got me is they have characters with specialties when they only have 1 or 2 dots. And in Revised, you only get that if you have 4 or more, which was kind of annoying. But anyway, yeah. The last section we have is entitled Epilogue, and it gives us some information. I very much rushed over the thing that had occurred in the beginning, but we get a torture scene of a traditionalist that has been abducted and is being processed. And we find out that this character has been processed into the Atlas unit, or one of the Atlas units, who are referenced throughout this book as being an enlightened shop corp that Adam had mentioned. And it is said that these units are 100% loyal. And in the epilogue, there is a reference to one of these units kind of second guessing the agent that had given it an order. And everyone's like, this can't possibly end poorly. And we get this absolutely graphic scene of this thing just literally cutting traditionalists in half. It was kind of ridiculous. We're talking about Army of Darkness level stuff here. Fast forward to 20th Anniversary Edition, they're like, oh yeah, those Atlas units. Whoever came up with that idea, that was just stupid. That takes us through the epilogue. I kind of gave my commentary throughout. So Adam, what did you think of the book overall?
Well, first off, on the epilogue story, I thought it was interesting how they made it kind of hard to tell if this is like a problem brewing in the Atlas units and eventually it's going to be a mess, or it's just that the Atlas units are not brainwashed zombies. They're clever and intelligent, and whenever you have clever, intelligent underlings, sometimes they're going to chat back at you, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to turn evil and mess everything up. And so it's like reading through that epilogue. It's like a storyteller could take this in one of two directions, and it's not really clear. And of course, they played up the rivalry between the Syndicate and the New World Order, which some people might consider old hat. I think it's fun. I like seeing it. But that's the epilogue. So going into the book as a whole, just general thoughts on it. Terry, I'd like to hear what you think.
Sure. I thought it was a big, fun book that did a great deal of work, for instance, more than I think the Iteration X book did, of saying, we're going to treat this like it is a tradition book and give you plots and threads that you can run for an N.W.O. game and what it's like inside of the technocracy. We hadn't really gotten a lot of information about what it's like inside there, except for the glimpse from Iteration X, since Guide to the Technocracy, which wasn't even a revised book. So it's been a bit. I thought it did a great job in updating it. I thought the book was messy and ambitious. Like, for instance, the way I read the data sphere, it suggests that once you establish a connection to someone data-wise, that you always have it. But so now I have this list that I need to keep track of, maybe, and now I need to keep track of what my characters are connecting to in downtime, or maybe I'm just misunderstanding it. I thought it was messy. I thought it was an interesting idea. It also mentions that for the first two levels, you can use either, and there are a bunch of cases where the book tries to do something big and ambitious and it maybe didn't have the editing or it didn't have the word count to kind of land it. It kind of shows some of the messy parts of the storytellering system, as I like to call it, because I can never remember if it's the storyteller or the storytelling system, because both exist, in terms of how to depict social media and characters trading information back and forth. But it really pulls the line forward, to me, into a more modern setting. We are firmly in a world past the initial damage of the Avatar Storm. We see a technocracy that is trying to figure out what's going on. The Syndicate N.W.O. thing, to me, is almost retrospectively added, because in the Syndicate book, it even said, oh yeah, we're besties with the N.W.O. We think they have this one thing wrong. They think all information is useful. We think some information is useful. It is interesting the way it adds it in, but at least among the fandom, there's kind of this feeling that this war was always brewing, and this certainly adds to it, especially when it includes note that's like, yep, 1900, that was when we got along the best. Everything's been downhill from there. So it's big and it's fascinating. I would have loved to have seen what this crew would have done with the traditions to get everything dragged forward, kind of 10 years to get a new coat of paint on all that. And I'm super excited to see what the rest of it is. I thought it could have used a little bit of editing. I think the art is pretty milquetoast, but then again, I don't really buy a print-on-demand black and white convention book for the art. So I'm kind of okay with that. Interestingly, despite being the exact same size in terms of pages pretty well as all the other tradition books, all of the revised convention books are on the short side. They're about 55,000 words, where the rest of the tradition books were generally about the high 50s to up to the high 60s. So in some cases, it kind of stretches it out. But on the whole, I was pleased with this. What do you think, Adam?
It was interesting on a couple of levels. One thing that I noticed was the first convention book was written as sort of a storyteller-facing book, Sourcebook on the villains, but it was just starting to hit that point where there was a little bit of a realization that these might make a fun player character. So there's some player-facing information there, but it was mostly, a villain source book. And this book is 100% player character focused. It's like we're assuming you're going to run some New World Order player characters if you're reading this. And so that gave the book a different tone. This idea that 15 years after the dimensional anomaly, there's going to be a shakeup of the conventions and the technocracy. Terry and I have spoken about this in past episodes of Tomes of Magic, but I'm of the opinion that it would be less than like 15 years. I think after 12 years pass, I think I would expect to see greater changes among the traditions and the conventions of the technocracy. I do like the idea of them saying, hey, there's going to be a big shakeup soon. The technocracy might come apart. We got to watch for that. I liked seeing that. To me, it seemed that this convention book follows Bill Bridges' revised edition more than Jess Heinig's revised edition. And by that I mean there is more of a willingness to acknowledge the notion of the Ascension War. This is going on. People take this seriously. Also, this notion that you can go to past editions of Mage, find interesting bits, and pull them out and use them now. It's okay. It's not such a bad thing. So in that sense, I think they were following Bill Bridges' lead. But that makes more sense because Bill Bridge was the second part of revised edition, which this is supposed to latch onto. So perhaps that's all there is to it. They want us to replace the word paradox with statistical inevitability. I'm sorry, that term is just too long. I'm not using it. I'm going to say paradox. It's faster. My players know it. I'm sticking to my guns on that one. There is some confusion over the term control with a capital C. When we were, last episode, we were talking about the book titled Ascension, and control was the highest level of leadership of the technocratic union. They were mages who were very powerful, very old, and very distant. And here, there's this notion that control is the people who run the equipment and the lighting, etc., in the interrogation rooms when you get the bad guys pulled in and you tie them up and interrogate them. So this confusion over what does the game term control mean was something that I thought was not such a good idea. I think this did a good job of dropping hints that the New World Order has a lot of bad actors in it, and as a group, they're up to no good, but it wasn't in your face. And that can be a sensitive relationship. It's been done poorly in a few past books, but I think they did it pretty well here. They said, look, we are the New World Order. We think we're good guys doing good things, but we're going to drop hints here and there all through the book that's like, maybe we're not such nice guys. Maybe we're not really keeping you in our thoughts like you think you are. Overall, I think the book was very reasonable. It was how do you say, sensible. It's like they looked at the past Mage material and said, can we fit this together in a way that's going to make some sense and kind of hold water? And they did that, and I appreciate that. There's good attention to detail, not just revised edition. They actually looked at some things from older books and said, what would we like to use from here? And so I think the writers of this book cared about their subject, and they had an open mind about what they might do with this without, getting too crazy. Unfortunately, I think that the spark of creativity was kind of dimmed here. I mean, they were constantly trying to give me plot hooks, and I love that. I appreciate that. I encourage that. But for some reason, so many of the plot hooks they were giving were just not very exciting. It just seemed like their imagination was being, kept within sensible parameters rather than being allowed to run free at times. And so I guess that was a disappointment of mine. But overall, no, I'm just impressed. I think they looked at the revised edition, the past material, and said, how can we make this hold water and seem interesting and put out a book that a storyteller can use and a player can find something fun in? And they did it. So, yeah, congratulations.
Yeah. Should I go on to a quote?
I want to hear a quote.
There were a few different voices that were done throughout this book. It had some pretty snappy writing. It was relatively self-aware. I got the sense that this book was written by Mage fans, for lack of a better term. It was people that were pretty familiar with how everything that had come before, but maybe had strong feelings about it. I don't know. When I talk to the dev, I'll do that. One of the ones that was most striking to me was the cold hard truth was that the world was changing and we could not afford to sit by while the masses were mobilizing. Just because a man profits from a drought doesn't mean he controls the weather. Good line. From the character, one of the character templates, you don't pay for dry cleaning. You have issued suits, including awesome sunglasses. Your pen can cut through steel. Your loafers were tested in another dimension and can withstand the vacuum of space. And now, thanks to enlightened science, you can even have those montages, which was on a section about a character wanting to live like a high-energy action movie thing. And those stuck out to me. So, Adam, what do we read next? When I think quotes, I think stories. And when I think stories, I think Adam. Adam, you got any plot ideas?
They just go together.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I do have 3 story ideas for this one, for the New World Order, and I tried to pay attention to the methodologies and steer clear of the obvious enemy, the virtual adepts. Number 1, after a foiled assassination attempt on his assistant, Henri Delores, head of the operatives methodology, begins to clean house. He uncovers Nefandi posing as operatives, and players are part of the team to shut them down. However, the players learn the guilty agents are innocent. Someone has been tagging them with negative resonance to make them targets. Dolores' old paranoia against the Nefandi is coming to the fore, and intel the players discover is coming from the Syndicate is fanning the flames. As the situation comes to a boil, a young woman shows up with a reliable technique to identify real Nefandi moving secretly through the ranks of the operatives and putting the false resonance on good agents. She was sent by Disbursements, a group within the Syndicate. What is the Syndicate's game? What's really going on underneath this storm is a mystery, but if the players don't move fast, the operatives' methodology may fall apart as many innocent agents get marked for death. Number 2. Members of the feed are baffled by a new meme sweeping through the internet. Posts with the line, "Are you crazy?" in them are the latest thing, but metadata attached to them is corrupting AI bots created by the New World Order. These bots return to New World Order networks and create records that induce quiet in technocrats. If not already on the job, the players are called in to help. The feed is preparing countermeasures against the virtual adepts, but the players discover marauders with ties to the digital web are involved. Not only that, but inducing quiet is not the real goal. The cases of quiet are highest among agents working on the new network project dubbed Aladdin. This network uses technology inspired by blockchain systems to make a data network that is harder to corrupt and more orderly. Not only does Aladdin feature prominently in the technocracy's future, but the technocrats falling into quiet are building a back door for it that connects with the digital web. Are the marauders striking a blow against order, or do they have a more specific target in mind? The players will need sharp technical skills as well as a way to find marauder weaknesses in a hurry. Number 3, the Ivory Tower is going to have an online forum. The Collegia have a hidden agenda. Members of the Collegium of Linguistics have become a problem that must be addressed. They have been instructed to present material that will get them censured during the forum. The players are on security detail for the forum, and they have been forbidden from interfering with the attack on linguistics. The players learn that unknown parties will infiltrate the forum to seize other members of the Ivory Tower. Players can choose to be part of the online protection or be present at one of the facilities from which Ivory Tower members will connect. If online, they will use their technical skills as they move about a network that mirrors the digital web in miniature. If offline, they will be able to watch the participants and network operators in person. As they move against infiltrators, they are contacted by someone claiming to represent the highest levels of the New World Order's administration. They must leave the targets unprotected for the good of the Order. Can the players trust their instincts on who's telling the truth, or can they investigate the proof they're given before the academics are abducted? Regardless how it shakes out, the players will get a new perspective on the New World Order's methods. Well, those are my story ideas. Hopefully those will spark some of your own. Terry, have we come to the end of another episode of Tomes of Magic?
I think we have come to the end of another episode of Tomes of Magic. And what tome of magic will we be magically reading next, Adam?
We are going to read convention book Progenitors, and I'm going to put a revised on the end so I can keep it straight. The Progenitors are getting an updated look. They were the first convention book in really the early days of first edition, so I'm expecting a very different book, and I'm looking forward to it.
Back when the technocracy was what is technically known as real weird. So I look forward to that. I look forward to that update too.
If you have something to say, please contact us at magethepodcast@gmail.com with your questions, comments, or feedback. Subscribe to Mage the Podcast on iTunes, Google Play, TuneIn, and other aggregators. If you like the show, others might like it too. And if you leave a review for Mage the Podcast, it makes us more visible in their searches, and we would certainly appreciate it. You can follow us on Twitter at Mage the Podcast. We're also on the web at magethepodcast.com. You can listen to past episodes there and see the complete show notes that we prepare for you. And we would like to give a big thanks to our executive producers, Terry.
And we say thank you to Anders S., Andrew Andelstein, Andy, Berto, Boo, Boogers to the Sixth, Brado the Blue, Brendan Morrill, Bryce Perry, Chris Sack, Dan Svensson, Dennis Osborne, Entropy Prime, Freddie, Gargle Noir, Guy Conan Stewart, Ian, Isabel Castillo, Jason Kennedy, Jason W. Biggs, Jay Sunsern, Jeff Waugh, Jenna F., John Horton, John Magnuson, Josh Goulden, Josh Hillerup, Josh Heath, Carl Halperin, Leslie Weatherstone, Lexa Conjurer, Michael Creedle, Michael Parker, Nibero, Neil Patterson, Nikita Klamanoff, Ralph Scheinhammer, Richard Bat Brewster, Ryan Hilton, Ryan Kendi, Sam Tobin, Stephen Carton, William Connolly, William Martin, W. Starter, and our Oracle level supporters, Christopher Phillips, who is the Oracle of retroactively introducing the Syndicate N.W.O. war into the canon, as well as Oracle Buck Farmer, the Oracle of the online platform Chatter. Thank you so much for your support.
Well, thanks again, everybody, for listening to us. And next time, we'll try to bring you another good episode of Tomes of Magic. Until then, truth until paradox. baby.
Go be the subtle change to history to make your ideas more palatable that you want to see in the world. Bye.